Tangled was the first Disney princess movie that I went to see in a theater, and it was also my first 3D movie. So that was a huge experience for me as a child, which has probably impacted how much I enjoy the movie today and leading into me wanting to create this doll. The initial step that I took with creating this doll was, checking out the outfit. It's come to my attention after the fact that the outfit I created is not 100% screen accurate, specifically with the bodice. I had trouble initially deciding where the divide was between the bodice part underneath and the main part with the tie front. If you look at the top, you can see that the lace part is not connected to the rest of the top bodice. This is further confirmed by the button part in the back. My confusion stemmed from the fact that the bottom of the bodice looks like one continuous piece, but it is in fact not. The lace is connected to the under part and the edge of the tie front is flat, despite the fact that they don't really behave as two separate pieces throughout the movie. This means the bodice I made is a little different. For mine, I made the underpart a completely separate garment, kind of like a regular corset, and then added a modesty panel to the main bodice portion to allow the lace to rest on its bottom edge. The underskirt was relatively simple to do. Basically all it is a plain white skirt with a trim edge, and that went pretty quickly. There was some new hardware that I worked with throughout this project, including eyelets, but I decided to be extra, unfortunately, and I got the tiniest eyelets that I think you can buy. I held off and only used those on the main bodice because that's really where it matters because you're going to see it. But even with the small eyelets that I put on the under bodice, it was a lot of work. This project had a whole lot of hurry up and wait involved with it because the purple skirt especially didn't really take me that long to sew. I mean, I had to piece out the sections of the skirt because there was a couple different seams along that skirt, but doing the math to make that work and then actually stitching that up didn't take a huge amount of time. What did, however, was the embroidery that goes all around the skirt. So that took me like a very, very long time. Mind you, I started this project probably well over 3 years ago. Realistically, hand stitching is something that you can expect when you're doing miniatures just because it is quicker to use a sewing machine, but when you have such tiny details, every stitch actually matters. And so there was a lot of hand stitching going into the main bodice. The one thing that I had to hand stitch, which probably took the most amount of time for this doll, is the puff sleeves, because I was originally going to just stitch those stripes together using a sewing machine, but like I said, I could not get them even enough to look nice. So it took me probably a good 2 weeks to stitch that little piece of fabric together before even going on to stitching everything else. Things are getting a little complicated for me because I have all these beautiful lines that I drew for how long I want the sleeves to actually be once I get the gathers in there. Problem is, for some reason, using the actual method that my book tells me on how to make gathers, it's not working. And I think that's because it's so thick on the back with all of the extra layers that I have from sewing the little lines in there, that I'm going to have to do this the old-fashioned way, which means good old thread and needle. However, I am glad that I stuck it out and did all the work to make sure that I stitched everything, embroidered everything, hand did whatever I needed to do in order to get it to look the way it does, because I am very proud of how it looks. The main thing that I was worried about with this outfit was that her body shape, the body shape of the doll, was going to change with this outfit, because when you add layers upon layers upon layers on a doll, something so small, it can get really apparent and it can make certain features look different than the original doll itself. Luckily, because of the corset, her figure is pretty much the same, just honestly more of probably a realistic figure for a real person. So not 100% screen accurate to the itty bitty waist of Rapunzel, but still an hourglass figure nonetheless, and so I'm pretty happy about that. The next step that I went to was repainting the face. Sometimes I'll do a reroot first, sometimes I'll do a repaint first. It kind of just depends on the needs of the doll that I'm working on. For Rapunzel, it was an absolute necessity that I repaint her face first because of the incredibly long hair that would have been everywhere if I were to do that first. And we'll get to the hair. That was, pun intended, a tangled mess. Repainting the face was pretty simple for this doll because the facial sculpt wasn't difficult to find. All I did was go to the Disney store, get the basic Rapunzel doll, and we were ready to go. The one good thing I do like about the Disney store dolls is, despite the body that this doll's head arrived to me on being not the best of quality, the facial sculpts for the Disney store dolls are consistently on point for their characters, even if they're not utilized to the maximum capacity, I believe, just because of mass manufacturing having to simplify features. So it was very simple for me to get the facial sculpt for this doll, and it was incredibly easy on top of that to repaint her face because the features are so exaggerated on Disney characters. Her eyes are about probably 4 times the size of the eyes that I put on my regular Barbie dolls, and not only that, but the facial sculpt has the eyes like inlaid. So if you're trying to get into doll repainting, I think Disney dolls is a great way to start because of the convenience of everything that I've just talked about, because it was so easy to translate my more precise details onto this doll. And then came the hair. I had a whole lot of trouble with the hair, basically a little bit from my own incompetence, some of it from just, the natural struggles that you have when you're doing a custom doll. The first thing that was a barrier for me was finding a hair color to match Rapunzel's hair in the first place. I was basically stuck to one Etsy seller, who I will link below, because that Etsy seller sold the hair in long enough strands that I could make her hair as long as I wanted it to be. Initially, I thought I was going to go screen accurate and do her yards of long hair that they reference in the movie, and then I kind of did the math and was like, yeah, that's not possible. And even if it was, it would have been a huge mess and just wouldn't have worked out at all. It took me about 4 tries to find the one that I actually ended up using. I think I've talked about this in a couple other videos, but that's just kind of a hurdle that you have to get through when you're customizing dolls or trying to match to a certain character. Really, 4 tries is not a bad ratio for this, I don't think, despite the fact that now I am flooded with blonde hair, so I'll probably have a whole bunch of blonde-haired projects coming up in the future. The real problem was not the fact that it took me so long to find a hair color. The real problem was not buying enough of the hair color and not using the supply I had properly. Now, I'm not 100% ready for this reroot. I have 2 bags of this beautiful saran hair. It's called Toffee. It's almost a perfect match. In fact, I like this a little bit better than the original hair that she has. The only problem is I bought these 2 packages a long time ago. It's not enough for the full reroot, and it was out of stock for the longest time, so I have another package on the way. But in the meantime, I'm going to be removing all of this lovely blonde hair so that she'll be ready to go. Because the hair was so long, I did not anticipate the fact that when I pulled the tiny sections to knot and put into her head, it was going to tangle the rest of the supply. So I wouldn't have actually ran out of the initial color I chose had I been a little more thoughtful in how I went about rerooting her hair, because I lost about a good chunk, I would say probably like 1/4 of my supply through, again, pun intended, tangling it up while I was trying to reroot her hair. Unfortunately, after I ran out, I found out that the hair color I chose was discontinued. But I was pretty lucky in finding another color right on the first try that's pretty similar. Now that she's all complete and done, I can kind of tell where the divide is in the 2 hair colors, but it's not very noticeable. Again, unless you're looking for it, then you're probably going to be able to see where that's at. Once I had gotten the complete reroot done, it was time to style the hair, which again, I was super excited about because I didn't actually really have to do anything. The only thing that was required of me for this doll was the thing that you have to do for all dolls that you reroot, which is create a part. And I did that the same way that I do all my dolls when I reroot their hair, dipping their hair in a pot of boiling water a few times to get it to bend the proper directions. Even the haircut was really simple because it didn't have to be a perfect seamless cut in any sort of fashion, just trimming trimming the edges so they all kind of fade off in a nice natural direction, and then that was that. From there, all I really had to do was put the head on the body, and so she was basically ready to go and done. I think she looks fantastic. I would really, really love to do some more Disney princess dolls in the future. Unfortunately, that would probably be a while because I am so backed up on projects. But this whole experience was so fun, and I'm just super happy that I took the time that was needed to create this doll.